So unless you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years, you will know that buying a house right now in the UK is more expensive than it's ever been in the history of the housing market in the United Kingdom. So today I wanted to give a quick snapshot of my thoughts on renting versus buying at the moment in 2024. What's better, what's worse, and is it a black and white decision? Is it the same for everyone? We're going to discuss everything in this video, and make sure you stick around right until the end to hear my prediction for the rental market in the UK, as well as the sales market in terms of forecasts and predictions for prices, whether they're going to go up or down, and perhaps a slightly longer term view on the next 5 to 10 years as well. But before we get into that, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to support us in the YouTube algorithm. It really does mean a lot. So whilst I'm rambling right now, go down then, hit that thumbs up button, and I'll be forever grateful and keep sending you out videos. And hopefully you can learn something from them. With that being said, let's get right into it. So the 2024 property market has been interesting so far. We're 3 weeks in, and activity levels have certainly gone up in the sales market relative to the last quarter of 2023. And so it's my opinion that 2024 is certainly going to be better than last year, 2023. In fact, Knight Frank have reversed their prediction, where it was previously that property prices are going to go down this year, to say now that property prices in 2024 relative to last year are going to be up by at least 3%, which is a good thing, but maybe not such a good thing for the lettings market. And this is where it gets interesting. So last year, the lettings market in the UK was booming. You could not let something quick enough, really, because everything was going so quickly. Whereas the sales market suffered slightly. And why did it suffer? Interest rates were really high. If you look at a 5-year period, they're at the highest point. Inflation was through the roof, and the Bank of England base rate kept creeping up, causing all of this inflation in terms of interest rates. And so the banks were charging a lot of money to borrow money, pretty much. In 2021, coming out of COVID, 2022, interest rates were an all-time low. People were getting mortgages at 1%, 2%, 2.5%, depending on personal circumstances. Whereas towards the end of last year, some of my clients and just the general market was charging 6%, 5%. If you're really lucky, 4%, which is a massive difference. And so for those that took out 2 or 3 year products when COVID was happening, they're coming up to a renewal date now, for example, where they're used to their 1% mortgage and now they're having to pay 5 or 6%, making a huge problem in terms of affordability for those individuals that over-leverage their position in terms of the money that they're borrowing against their property. And therefore, a lot of people decided to start selling their properties, and so the supply of properties coming into the market was higher than ever before. We had more listings than ever before in the last 5-year period I'm talking about, of course. The buyer pool kept shrinking because the interest rates were so high and the sentiment was just off in the market. There was not a lot of confidence in the market. And therefore the imbalance between supply and demand started really becoming quite significant, and therefore prices started dropping as a result. And so last year was tough for sales, but now that we're heading, if we reverse that whole psychology and the whole sort of process of getting the prices down, now in 2024, interest rates are starting to drop. The Bank of England base rate has held for the first time in a very long time, and inflation has also just been reported as dropping, and therefore it's cheaper to borrow, and there's more positive sentiment in the market, and therefore buyers have more confidence and they want to return to the market. And so that buyer pool is now going from the shrunk version to slowly increasing. And as you know, it just tips that scale in terms of supply and demand the other way slightly. So because we have more buyers and, relatively speaking, the same number of properties, prices are likely to start creeping up again. And we're not talking anything stupid, tens of percent or anything like that. As Knight Frank have predicted, it's likely going to be around 3% this year. So it's interesting to see it shifting, and certainly positive for me, an agent that works in the sales market. But in the lettings market, now because it's slightly more affordable to purchase and there's more positive sentiment about buying, it's likely that the pool of lettings applicants will reduce, and therefore rental properties are going to suffer slightly. Landlords that were getting crazy rents 2 years ago and even last year are now going to be hit with, well, their expectations aren't going to be matched, let's just put it that way. And that might create a bit of a problem in terms of properties in the lettings market coming onto the market that are overpriced and sitting there for a long time. So we might see a bit of a shift this year. And what has all of this got to do with the question of whether you should buy or rent in 2024? The answer is, it really does depend on your personal circumstances. Buying a property now is relatively cheap compared to, well, if you look at historical data, towards the end of 2022, prices were really high. Towards the end of 2023, they were really low. And yet now we're at this sort of almost balance point where positive things are happening, so confidence is returning, yet interest rates are still higher than they were in 2024. And so there isn't as many buyers as there were, in 2022. So there aren't as many buyers as there were in 2022. And so I think if you ask me whether I would buy now instead of 2022, I think now is a better time to buy. Is it a better time to buy than Q4 2023? Probably not, because people are getting really good deals, picking up extremely good deals. There's a flat that sold in Knightsbridge with an asking price of 17 million for 11.9 million towards the end of last year, because buyers that were cash buyers, for example, were benefiting from the big discounts, relatively speaking. So is it still a good time to buy now in 2024? I would say yes, it certainly is, and it all obviously depends on where you're buying. I work in prime central London, so I know the market here, and every road has its own micro market. So I could tell you that on one street, one property at one price is a good property to buy, and that on another street, another property at another price is not a good property to buy. So it also varies property to property on the micro level, but from a macro point of view, I would say that it's still a good time to buy. Now, should you buy or should you rent? On the rental side of things, it depends, I think, mainly on personal circumstances. So you guys know that I bought a property and then I did it up and I ended up selling it so I could start my business, and now I'm renting. Now, can I afford to buy a property and live in one? Yeah, but is it the best thing for me at the moment from a financial point of view? No. I'm in my early 20s and I want to have the cash flow to be able to run this business and build it. So I'm investing my money, my capital, into this business that will then print more money for me, hopefully, in the future, so that I could later invest in assets like real estate. The return on investment on my money now, on my cash, is far greater by investing into a business than it would be investing into a property on which I have a mortgage that I'm living in. That property, once you buy a property with a mortgage and live in it, becomes a liability. It's no longer, it's not really an asset, it's not an income producing asset. You're paying a mortgage to live there, and therefore you're losing that money, you're paying for it. Whereas if you put money into a business and that business starts to generate money, that's then obviously an income producing asset. And the money that's generated from this income producing asset, yes, later on down the line, I'll invest into property that I can live in. But for the time being, instead of putting 150k into a flat to pay for the deposit and renovations and stamp and whatever, I'd rather put, say, X, that number of money that I've just made up, 150k, into the business, and in the meantime rent a property out which only costs me X per month. And so I'm leveraging my cash position as such. So for an individual like me, renting right now makes more sense. It doesn't matter if the rental market is inflated or if the sales market is not inflated or anything like that. Because of my personal circumstance, it actually makes more sense on a return on investment basis to rent a property rather than buy one, so that I can leverage my cash position. But if you don't want to think like that and you just want to know where you're going to get the better deal, it's pretty equal at the moment. Lettings market is no longer as hot as it was towards the end of last year, and the sales market isn't as bad as it was towards the end of last year. We're heading to a bit more of a balance in general. So I would say you can't go wrong. You've just got to speak to your agent, you've got to get the right advice. Every property will be different. On a macro perspective, I think things are equaling out slowly, but on a micro perspective, you need to speak to a professional, you need to speak to an agent and ask them, what do you think, show me comparables, and make a decision from then onwards. If we zoom out of the economics of everything and the finances and what's better and worse in the markets, from a personal point of view, you've got to think about where you want to put your money and what's going to make you the most money. I want to make money at the moment. I'm in an early stage of my life. I don't have children, I don't have commitments, I don't have a family that I have to put in the house. So I don't mind renting, and I don't mind the risk of being kicked out in 2 years' time or whatever, because I'm able, and I'm very fortunate to have that flexibility to rent right now so that I could use the money on something else. But if your cash position is much stronger than mine, you might have enough to purchase a residential asset and still invest into other things, and so it really does depend. Now, I appreciate that was a bit of a ramble. If you have any questions about this subject, make sure you put them in the comment section down below. And with that being said, make sure you leave a like to help me out in the YouTube algorithm. I would really appreciate it. See you next time.